coming up is Winterton, a man with a great physique, a super hard worker, on and off the track. Got himself supremely fit every summer. He'd come to training and he was just in here. He was able to turn his game around, and I think Brett Love was quite hard on him when he first came down. When Lovey first started coaching here, saw him as an outside player. I don't know that that was a true indication of what everyone thought of Winno. I sort of hadn't been here long enough to pass judgment, but certainly Lovey sort of latched onto him and told him that he had to change his ways, and someone that I respect enormously for being able to do that. I don't think in the course of footy, I don't know that there's many guys that have the mental capacity and the strength to be able to change their game around from being an outside player to an inside player. I think it's probably easier the other way around. And like I say, I don't know many guys would be able to do what Winno did and change his game and become such a great player, not just the club but also the VFL. Outstanding career that he had, and still doing good things in the Eastern Footy League. Winno.
Started in the under-9s. I think I was 7, so I had a couple of years in the under-9s at Hallam, and played my junior footy at Hallam up until under-14s, and then unfortunately couldn't get a side together for the under-15s, so I went across to Narre Warren and played under-15s and under-16s at Narre Warren, and then from there I'd gone through the schoolboys program with the Stingrays and then progressed to the under-18s TAC. Played 2 years at Stingrays and TAC, which I loved doing. Once I was done there, always said that I wanted to play the highest level I possibly could for as long as I could. So obviously Frankston and the Stingrays had the affiliation, so I came down here, which was pretty intimidating at that stage as an 18-year-old kid, and Frankston had gone on a real recruiting spree. I think Macy had opened up the checkbook and recruited a lot of sort of veteran VFL players who had had success. A lot of them had come from Springvale and Sandy, and they were sort of in their late 20s, and here I was as an 18-year-old kid rocking in, trying to prove myself. But yeah, then spent, I think it was 9 years here, which I loved. Once I left here, I was 28 once I left here, and I just sort of, my body and having trained in those 3 or 4 nights a week, right back since I was probably 15, 16, and had started to take its toll on my body and my knees, and I'd certainly lost a little bit of pace, so I was realistic of where I was at. Probably just didn't quite have the drive to go through that and continue to play at VFL level, so went down to Mulgrave for 2 years as an assistant coach, which I loved doing as well, and then took on the coaching role at Bayswater for 3 years, where we played finals in my first year there, which was good, and then went across to Mitcham this season just gone, and we were lucky enough to win the flag, which is a fantastic feeling. It's funny, you can usually pinpoint most players' strengths. You sort of look at a guy and go, he's super quick, or geez, he kicks the ball a long way, or he can take a good one-on-one mark, and I could probably never do any of those things. So I think I was probably just had an ability to be able to read where the footy was going to go, and yeah, I think that was certainly my biggest strength, and my work rate. I'd sort of always prided myself on preparing myself, right throughout the pre-season and pre-game, and eating the right things and drinking the right things and making sure that I was able to get the best out of myself. But yeah, it was just, I think it was more, just work rate and preparation and just an ability to sort of read the footy. As I said, I certainly couldn't kick the ball sort of 40, 45 metres at any stage, but I think just the ability to sort of to win the footy and find some open space. I think I did that pretty well. I was able to get out wide. Some of my teammates might have said I was a little bit soft, but I was able to find some space and usually make a pretty good decision, I thought, and I thought my skills were pretty good. Look, I was pretty lucky with my job. I'd finish at 4:30 in Dandenong and come straight to training from there, so I'd usually get here about 5 o'clock, which would sort of give me that hour block to work on the body, as you said. It was because, you know, I wasn't sort of blessed with, you know, elite speed or size or strength. I was certainly not naturally strong, so I had to work on that, and that was something that I just enjoyed doing. I sort of felt lazy if I wasn't doing something, and, you know, even in the pre-season, you know, in the break in between the season and pre-season starting, I was, you know, on the way home from work, I'd always go to the gym, I'd go for a run. I didn't just sort of go home and just sit on the couch and whatever. I just always sort of had that drive to try and get the best out of myself. I don't sort of know where that came from. It probably came from my dad. I remember when I was 15, I think, I started doing the pre-season at the under-18s at Stingray level. I was never going to make the list at that stage because I was too young, but I probably hadn't done anything for 3 or 4 weeks, and he sort of sat me down and said to me, look, you know, you're trying out for an elite under-18 competition, and you're not giving yourself the best opportunity to make the squad. So I think that probably stuck with me, and sort of from that day, even up until now, I've sort of always worked pretty hard and tried to get myself the best out of myself, and probably try to set an example to whoever I've played with, that, you know, that's what you should be doing. You shouldn't just try and rely on your natural abilities. A lot of guys have a lot more natural ability than I ever did, but there was one thing that I was determined to do, was to make sure that I was never outworked. I didn't sort of want to, you know, come to the end of the game or at the end of the season and be sitting down and looking back and going, geez, I wish I had worked a bit harder during the pre-season or during that week, or did that extra weight session or that extra recovery session. I wanted to make sure that I'd sort of ticked every box and give myself the best opportunity to succeed. The memories it brings back, I think it's probably similar to anyone who walks back into a footy club. Just the mateship that you do form playing footy. It's obviously playing, you know, VFL footy is really demanding, training wise and playing wise and that sort of stuff. But you certainly form a really good bond with your teammates because you work hard together. But at Frankston, you certainly played hard together, as I say. It was. You know, the functions were always fantastic, and just the banter around the club. I was probably always one of the last guys to leave after I'd iced up, and, you know, spoke a bit of crap and got in the showers and continued to do that. And footy clubs are fantastic for that. You build so many great mates, and this place, you know, having spent 9 years here, and I don't even know how many guys I would have played with over 9 years, but it was probably 300 or something, I'd say, and you build a lot of good mates through that, and it just brings back those memories walking through here, and, you know, seeing Rigger standing in the corner wearing a G-string, or, you know, CROWE when he was here being as loud as he is. Just those memories that come flooding back as just some really great times that we had at the club together. First coach when I came down was Rob Mace. Macey was just such an intense coach. He just the passion he had for the club, obviously stemming from his father. But Macey was just so intense and so passionate. You could just, you know, hear his passion sort of oozing out of him as he spoke. And he was, you know, to be honest, he was pretty intimidating for an 18-year-old kid. He's a fantastic guy, you know, once you get to know him. But he's certainly intimidating. He's sort of, you know, big sort of aggressive guy, but he was great. I really enjoyed playing under Macey just because I respond to guys who are passionate, and he was certainly passionate. Phil Partington actually sort of took over for the second half of my second year while I was down here, and had some really good success with him. I think he's gone on to work in the AFL or VFL system or something, Pardo, so he was a really good guy. Then Lovey come on board, and he had a huge impact on my career. Lovey did. It probably took me 2 or 3 years to, I guess, convince Lovey that I was good enough to be a regular senior player. He was really hard on me, which was fair enough, because he wasn't happy with the way I went about my footy. I was probably more of an outside player at that stage, and he was sort of critical on the fact that I wasn't hard enough at the contest, which he was totally spot on. So he had a huge impact on my playing career, because he certainly made me a much better player in the time he was here. And he sort of found that delicate balance between us. We're obviously trying to be a professional club, but the fact that well, all of us had jobs as well, so we were sort of part-time footballers competing against full-time footballers, and Lovey found that happy balance between training us hard, but then also knowing when the time to sort of pump the brakes and pull back and make sure that we were refreshed and right come game day. So he was great. He's funny, Lovey, because anyone who's ever seen him on TV, he's not a natural talker, or he doesn't enjoy talking in front of groups. There's that infamous footage of him on the footy show sweating up and needing a towel to cool down, and he was similar to that. And he was fine amongst the boys, but in a group, he wasn't a great talker at function or anything. But he's that kind of bloke that for whatever reason it was, you just craved his approval, and I think that's what good coaches are. You want to impress. You wanted to impress him, so that's what made him such a great coach. And then in my last year here, Shannon Grant came, and Shagger had obviously come from an elite background, 300 game AFL player, and All Australian. He had numerous things that he'd done at AFL level, and he was just fresh out of AFL as well. So he came down here and tried to really make it a super professional club and do all the right things and get the best out of us, but probably just didn't quite gel. And that's nothing against Shagger. As I said, he knows his footy. Obviously he's gone on to to be assistant coach at AFL level. He's fantastic, knows his footy, great guy, communicates really well, but I think just his style, I mentioned earlier, Lovey found that balance between knowing that we were working as well as playing footy, but Shagger was so full on because that's the background he'd come from. And when he came here, we were sort of, we'd be training late and then having meetings late and not probably getting out of the club until 9:30, and then a lot of guys are driving home and getting home at 10, 10:15, having dinner, going to bed, and then 90% of the guys working here were tradies, so they were getting up early, and I think a lot of guys just found that really demanding, and I think that's probably why we struggled a little bit that year. But like I said, that's nothing against Shagger at all. He probably just wasn't quite familiar with how it worked down here. But he was great. I learned a lot from him because, like I said, he's got a fantastic footy brain and certainly knows his stuff. So yeah, I certainly got a lot out of him. And as far as me coaching and taking things from guys I've coached under, I've taken little bits of all of them, mainly from Lovey, and because he probably, he coached me for, it was probably about 6 years or so. So I got the most out of him, but I certainly took parts out of Shagger that I learned in that last year, and just that passion, as I mentioned earlier with Rob, that he displayed. I think players usually respond pretty well to passion, so if you can sort of use some of that as well when you're coaching, that certainly helps you. All the senior players were probably, at least mid-20s to sort of 30. So, Macy had gone on a real recruiting drive, and I didn't know who these guys were at the time when I got to the club. But once we started playing footy and I saw what they were about, Adrian Little was, to this day, the best defender I've ever seen. His left fist should be in a statue at some club somewhere, because he used to get it to everything. He was never beaten. I don't think he ever got beaten in the 2 years I played with Ada. He was fantastic. Nick Sortner also came to the club that year, and anyone who's been involved in the VFL at any stage knows who Sorts is, and he's a big sort of outgoing personality, but geez, he can play some footy. His hands were unbelievable, and even in the second year he was here, we really struggled. I don't think we won a game for the first half of the year, and maybe ended up winning four or five at the most. And he kicked about 90 odd goals, I reckon, that year. He was incredible. After that period, it was Mickey Ablett who won 3 or 4 best and fairest, I think, and might even be selling him short. Mick was just a natural footballer, not overly quick. Don't think he probably ever finished in the top 20 in any sort of time trial we ever did, and wasn't a super long kicker or anything, but just played off half back and had the ability to know where the ball was going to be. He was probably that real attacking sort of half defender before it was sort of in vogue at AFL level, and used to get tagged off half back, and he was just a fantastic player. Ash Roberts was at the club at that stage as well, and Ash was, his attack on the footy was mental. It's the only word to describe Ash on the footy field is mental. He had no regards for his personal safety, backing back into packs and jumping on the footy and getting kicked in the head and then getting back up and getting kicked in the head again. And he was just so inspiring, and I think that's what made Ash a great captain, despite the fact he probably wasn't the greatest, natural talker. He just sort of led by example, so Ash was fantastic. Big Normie Clark, when I got to the club, I'd probably just missed Normie's best years, to be honest, but he was still a super player. His ability to palm the ball was absolutely incredible, and I know the times that I ran through the midfield, he certainly made me look pretty good, even though I tell him it was the opposite. He certainly made me look really good, and his skills for a big bloke at 205 or 206 centimetres or whatever he is, usually those guys aren't the most fluent kickers, but Normie's skills were fantastic. He was almost the best kicker in our club, and for a guy at his height to be able to do that, just spoke volumes about what a player he was. Had Aaron Edwards for the 1 year, and as was he basically was single-handedly winning us games in that back half of the year. He actually had a slow start to the year. Probably took him 7 or 8 games to probably acclimatise to playing with us and the way we wanted to play our footy. But then in the back half of the year, he was averaging, I reckon, 7 goals a game, and ended up kicking 100 goals, which hasn't been done for a long time. Hasn't been done since then, and hadn't been done for quite a while before that, I think. So his hands, I mentioned Swords had great hands, but as his hands were vice-like. He was just, once he got his hands on it, the defender had no chance of being able to spoil him. So he was a great player. Justin Berry played a number of years with Bez, and in the time I played with Bez, he was far and away the best small forward in the competition. His ability just to turn a game in a quarter of footy was just unparalleled in the VFL at that time. He not only could he kick 3 or 4 goals, but the way he used to celebrate and get the crowd going, which would in turn then get us going. He was fantastic. His speed was... I always knew Bezza was quick. Obviously, at training, I was no chance of keeping up with him and watching him play, but there's sort of one instance that stands out for me when we went up to Geelong, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm a mad Geelong supporter, so I always enjoyed travelling up to play there. And this particular day, David Wojcinski was playing. Must have been coming back from an injury or something. So Wojcinski, the reason Wojcinski was playing senior AFL footy and played in a couple of premierships for Geelong was because he had elite speed at AFL level. He had the ability to get the ball and run away from guys and take bounces and kick the footy. So that's why he was playing AFL footy. And there was a particular instance in the game where out on the wing, Bezza either picked up the ball or received the handball, and Wojcinski was right on his hammer. And Bezza got the ball, and I think he just sort of looked around and saw it was him and took off, took a bounce, ran another 20 metres, and then kicked the footy, and Wojcinski didn't make up any ground on him at all. And Bezza probably even gained a bit on him. And I remember thinking during the game, bloody hell, like, I know how quick Wojcinski is, and Bezza's actually with the footy, which you're obviously a lot slower when you're running with the footy and taking a bounce, was able to go away from him. And that just sort of highlighted to me how quick Bezza was. He was unbelievable. And also Marcus Marigliani too. Rigger, when he first came to the club, I think he actually came from Seaford. I'm not sure if he might have gone through the Sandy Dragons, maybe in the TAC, but I think he had a year at Seaford just playing local footy, and came to the club and was basically just sort of a hit-up half forward who could, he was sort of a nice one-on-one mark and was a beautiful on kick, but he'd sort of only have 8 to 10 touches and maybe kick a goal or two, and was probably just clinging onto his spot, to be honest, at that stage. And in between the time when he first got there and the time when he left, he he'd worked so hard that he'd made himself an elite midfielder who could rack up 30 touches and use a footy well and hurt the opposition with his kicking. And even to now, I think he played his 150th last year, and disappointed I couldn't get along for that. But I think even now he's even playing us off half back. And if you told me, 10 years ago or 8 years ago, however long it was, that Rig would be able to transform himself into an attacking half back, I would have looked at you pretty crazily, because I just didn't think he had that in him at that stage. But he just worked so hard and gave himself every opportunity to succeed and got the most out of himself. So he was just a fantastic player as well. Frankston, definitely we played hard on the field and that, but we certainly enjoyed ourselves off the field. Just the way our draw always was every year. We always used to play Sunday games, which wasn't conducive to going out. You certainly can't go out on a Saturday night before a Sunday game. So we always used to circle on the calendar the Saturday games. And it was usually probably three or four functions throughout the year. So they were always the best time of the year. The mid-year ball or some other function that we'd have. The boys would all attend, and we'd have a few beers and have a lot of laughs. So that was always great. The footy trips, I love footy trips. I'm too old to go on them now because I just can't go the distance anymore. But when I was here, I think I only missed a couple. But yeah, they were fantastic. You become so much closer with guys on footy trips, because you're obviously spending all day for 3 days and doing stupid things that you usually wouldn't do in your normal day life. And there was obviously your standouts on the footy trips, like John Hines always used to come into his own on a footy trip. Aaron Murray was a footy trip specialist. But the times like that are what make this club so special. The fact that we're able to bond, on the field and work hard together. But you'd have to go a long way to find a better bunch of blokes to have a function with, or to go on a footy trip with. And certainly when I come back to the club, or when we go to past players' days, footy trips and functions and stuff are certainly one of the first things that comes up, and we like to reminisce about the stupid things that we used to do and the fun times we used to have. So yeah, they were always great times. Not really. Like as I mentioned earlier, it was more the fact that I didn't think I could physically give everything that I needed to, and I mentioned that I'd like to give everything that I could and make sure I took no shortcuts, and I just didn't think I quite had that in me physically. I'd sort of hurt my knee a few years earlier, and that still gives me trouble now, but I can manage that a bit better, only training twice a week as opposed to back then when it was 3 or 4. And I wish I had been able to go an extra year, because I knew that we were losing quite a few experienced senior players, and I wish I could have stuck it out and helped the club out in that respect. But I would have been doing it for the wrong reasons, and not being able to give 100%. I would have ended up hating it, because when I commit to something, I like to give 100%, and I just wouldn't have been able to do that where I was at that stage of my life. So I regret it in the fact that I couldn't hang around and help the club when it certainly needed to, but I think I was pretty much cooked given the amount of footy that I'd played and trained and done up to that point in my career. I played on Robbie Nahas a couple of times, and he was a really tough opponent to play on because he was just so quick, and which made my life difficult. I remember we played against James Kelly one day, because as I mentioned, I'm a Geelong supporter, so that one certainly sticks out for me. Podsy Adley was obviously a really good VFL player, and was always hard to play against. I think he got a hold of us one day. Must have been either at Werribee or when he was at Geelong, I'm not too sure. Polly used to do a pretty good job on him usually, but I think he got hold of us one day. The teams like Sandy had guys like Gallagher and that, who actually played here for a few years, or a year or two after I left. They were always super players. It was Toby Pinwell was a fantastic player. I'm not sure if he's still at Port or not, but he was a really good midfielder. Brett Johnson, who ended up playing against at Montrose as well, was just a great player. So you obviously had those guys who were coming down, who were involved with the AFL clubs, who for whatever reason weren't playing that week, whether they dropped to come back from injury. They were always great players to play against, but there was certainly plenty of guys, you know, who weren't on AFL lists that could have been, and just every week, to be honest, you never walked out there and looked around and thought, geez, I've got an easy day today. So yeah, whoever you lined up against could always play some footy, which was always a great challenge, which was one of the things I really loved about playing VFL footy, that you had that challenge every week and you just had to see whether you're up to it, and that's something that I really enjoy. Well, I think for every player, your first senior game sort of stands out to you. It was played out here against, pretty sure it was Carlton. It was a big crowd because we were a really successful side that year, and it was back in the days when the bench wasn't overly utilised, so I think I sat there for quite a while, maybe even up until the second half, if I had to take a guess. So it's funny when players come to me now and whinge and tell me that they're getting on at the 8-minute mark of the first quarter. It's like, I've sat on the bench for halves and nearly a whole game. So anyway, I got on, and yeah, it was just like I was in a daydream, to be honest with you. I was sort of running around like a shook with its head cut off. I do remember I managed to kick a goal somehow from the goal line. It sort of fell in my hands, and I snagged the goal. And so yeah, my first game definitely stands out. Also, just the times we played finals. I think I was lucky enough to play, I think we might have made the finals 4 or 5 times in the 9 years I was here. So the one particular year that stands out for me is the year that we had Aaron Edwards at full forward, because I reckon that was the one that got away for us. We'd probably, the first half of the year, we really struggled, and I think I mentioned earlier that Az probably struggled a little bit to adapt to our game style, but halfway through the year it just clicked for us. Az found his form, we found our form as a team, and that obviously helped Aaron, but Aaron also probably found his form as well, and we were just in red hot form. I think we had a pretty home sort of heavy schedule in the back half of the year, and out here we thumped Sandy, who went on to win the grand final by over 10 goals. We beat Sandy by over 10 goals. Springvale by over 10 goals. We were just in red hot form, and leading into the finals, we're lucky enough to play our first final here against Coburg, which we won by 3 or 4 goals. And unfortunately, late in the game, Az hurt his knee. It was a pretty bad knee injury, and I don't even think he trained leading into the final the next week. And he played, but he kicked 3 goals exactly to get his 100th goal. But he was only on one leg. I think he actually had to get an operation done once the season was done. And I think we lost by about 15 odd points, and it was a difference between us having a 3-goal full forward as the 7 or 8 goal full forward as had been up until that point. And if we had won that game, I think it was against Northern, and got to the prelim, I don't think Sandy would have been too keen to face us, to be honest. As I said, we touched them up, you know, just recently, and I still believe to this day that side had the ability to win a flag at VFL level. So it's something I look back on as a highlight, but also something I probably look back on and with a bit of disappointment as well. So yeah, just those final series are the ones that stand out for me. Any time that's what you play footy for, is to be successful, obviously, and get the best out of yourself and the best out of the team. So also in the second last year too. My second last year, we played finals and won our first final, sort of coming from behind late, and then the next week we lost by about a goal or something. I think it was Callum Murch, I think it was, kicked one of the arsiest goals you've ever seen from the boundary line, that sort of dribbled and spun and somehow went through. I reckon if you gave him 100 kicks, he'd probably kick it 1 or 2 times, and that knocked us out. And it was similar to the previous year, where we really got our tails up towards the end of the year and could have been really dangerous going forward. So the highlights for me are just the success we were able to have and playing in those big games, the finals. The hill was basically like having a 19th man, to be honest. It was when we were up and going and they were beating the drums and there was a guy in a Dolphin suit dancing around and Normie was taking a mark and the chant would go up of Normie. The hill was just such a unique thing for us to have, because no other club had that. A lot of the teams were either affiliated or, you know, proper types, if you want to call them that, at Port Melbourne, who were probably sipping a tea and clapping politely as they kicked goals, whereas we had that real, and because our ground was, you know, so much smaller than the opposition's grounds, it was probably pretty intimidating, I'd suggest, for sides to come here when we were playing good footy and the hill were up and going. So the hill were fantastic, mate. I used to love what they'd give us, and there'd be nothing better than having a great win against a really good side, and you know, would go over and clap the hill and thank them for their contribution, because, you know, they were just as important as anyone who had been out on the ground that day. Yeah, so when I decided to leave Frankston, at that stage, honestly, I hadn't even really thought a hell of a lot about getting into coaching. While I was playing, I was just you tend to sort of just focus on yourself and what you can do to help the team and that sort of stuff, and whatever the coach told me to do, I just did it. I was never sort of one to think, well, hang on, maybe we should be doing this. So once I was done playing, I got a few offers for some coaching roles down this way, but I didn't think I was quite ready for that, so I decided to go to Mulgrave as a playing assistant under Hayden Stanton, who I did know prior to going down there, and I had the tie with Mulgrave because my dad had played there and my two uncles had played there in the premiership as well, so that was also a lure to get me to the club. So yeah, played 2 years under Mulgrave. We won a flag the first year I was there, which at that stage Mulgrave had the longest premiership drought in the EFL, so that was great. I think they'd lost the previous two grand finals, so just to see the passion in the players the day that we were able to win it was great. So then we went up to Divi 1 and struggled a little bit. After that year, I decided that I was ready to get into coaching, so went across to Bayswater for 3 years and loved my time there. Met some really good people there. Played with some really good players as well who could be playing at VFL level. There's no question about that. Played finals in my first year there, but we missed out in the second year and third year as well. We had a super young list, which I think our average age was about 20 or 21, and I really enjoyed that year. Trying to teach the kids, and we really improved in the second half of the year, which I was proud of. And then this year just gone, I went across to Mitcham, who again, actually, when I got there, had the longest premiership grade in the AFL as well. So they were really, really hungry for success. They'd sort of been hovering around the mark for 2 or 3 years. So to be honest, I walked into a really good situation that was just tailor-made and ready to win a flag, and we're lucky to do that. And you don't. I'd never really been around local clubs before. In my time at Frankston, but after this year winning the flag as a coach, you just see how influential local clubs are in the community, because I had people coming up to me who were 50, 60 years old and telling me that all they wanted to see before they died was the Mitcham Premiership, and how they'd been at the club for 30 years, and through the bad times where they'd almost got relegated to Division 4, and there were people crying and stuff after the game, and it's like local footy just doesn't get the kudos it deserves, I don't think, amongst the community, because it just bands so many people together, and so many young kids who could be sort of aimless and go off on the wrong path, but they're sort of, they get to a footy club and they get amongst mates and they're sort of pushed into the right direction, and footy clubs do that so well. and also with, you know, it gives the parents something to sort of bond with their children over and support them, and there's just so many positives in footy clubs that, you know, after seeing how much it meant to so many people this year, it's, you know, hopefully I can be involved in, once my playing days are done, I think I'd like to be involved anyway in local footy, whether it's as a coach or something anyway, because I just see how how influential it is on so many people. As far as it's being a coach has certainly developed me as a person off the field. Although my wife probably doesn't like how much time I spend at the club, it certainly developed me off field, which obviously helps. You know, in my working environment as well. We sort of started up a business over the last year or so with my wife, and being leading and being in charge of, you know, 60 guys every week for the last 4 years, it's definitely helped me in the business sense as well. So it's got so many positives playing local footy and being involved that I just love it.